Hi, everyone. Happy Tuesday, everyone. Thank you for joining us here today. My name is Karen Camblin, and I'm the Environmental and Climate Justice Chair for the Virginia State NAACP. The main goal of the ECJ program here in Virginia is to advocate to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, encourage energy efficiency, and promote community resiliency. Today, we will have a robust conversation on a critical tool to accomplish our mission, applying for the electric school bus funding for our schools. We will hear from leading experts and NAACP leadership. But before we start, I would like to take this opportunity to hear from our president, President Barnett. Please say a few words.
Thank you for joining us tonight to discuss EPA's Clean School Bus Funding Program and how important it is for us to be an active participant in discussions here in Virginia to not only encourage localities to apply, but to make sure students in vulnerable communities are prioritized at all stages. Black youth are already very likely to feel the impact of climate change, toxic air and water pollution, and other environmental injustices. Studies show approximately 71% of Black people live in counties that are in violation of federal air quality standards because of systematic neglect, displacement, and intentionally placing toxin in Black communities. We applaud the NAACP National for recognizing the benefits of this program and encouraging all units and branches to become part of the conversation. Tonight, we will hear from leading experts on the program's purposes and benefits, and most importantly, why it is important for your localities to hear from you. The Virginia State Conference, NAACP, will be here to support branch efforts and encourage units, environmental and climate justice committees to incorporate this as part of their advocacy plan. We have a short window of opportunity. The grant deadline is in August. If you do not have an environmental and climate justice committee, please reach out to Karen Camblin and she will help you get one going. Thank you for joining us. And now I'll turn it back over to Karen. Karen, take it away.
Well, thank you, President Barnett. And thank you for those inspiring words of encouragement and getting us out there to advocate for clean buses in our community. As President Barnett had said, I just wanted to emphasize just how important this is. The American Lung Association finds that Black children are 3 to 5 times more likely to enter the hospital due to an asthma attack. So this is very, very important for us to be a part of it and actively advocating for these school buses in our community. So joining us here today, we have our moderator, Joe Dillard. But before I introduce Joe and have him take the mic, I just wanted to do some little directions, rules of engagement for tonight. We will have Lexi Lynn, who's with us here today. She is the fellow with Clean Energy Works. She'll be helping us monitor the chat. So please have all of your questions. Please place them in the Q&A. But we want to hear from you and we want to know that you joined us today. So in the actual chat, please give us your name and what part of the Commonwealth, or actually what part of the nation that you're joining us, because we may have some out-of-state friends with us and allies with us here today, and what organization that you're with. And if you are a NAACP member, please give us your branch number. So sit back, learn, and just remember, this is the first of many conversations. This is a very complex process. And so, as President Barnett said, we are here to provide resources and tools, and we brought the best of the best experts with here to talk with you tonight, that we can continue the conversation with Carolina. And so with that, I would like to introduce our moderator for today, Joe Dillard. Joe is the Director of Equitable Innovation and Legislative Policy for GRTC. He is the former president of the Norfolk NAACP branch, and he is the contributing member of the Virginia State Conference Political Action Committee, as well as the Environmental and Climate Justice Committee. So thank you for joining us here today, Joe, and take it away.
Thank you, Karen. I want to first thank you, President Barnett, Karen Jones, and the local branches for, I guess, allowing me to moderate. And I never thought, President Barnett, that I would quote James G., but I get him now. When you say, every time I try to leave, you guys keep pulling me back, but I have much love for the NAACP, and wherever I can help out, I'm here to do it. We have some great speakers present today, and I have the pleasure of introducing them. But just to piggyback on what Karen had already said, I'm looking in the chat now. I see President Seneca Bach, who was one of my road dogs down in Hampton Roads, has already checked in. We see Gloucester, Chesterfield, and Loudoun have already checked in, as well as the sorority of AKA. Make sure you're using that chat as you hear these presenters, because I'll be focusing back on that as your moderator to try to gain or garner those questions. The first person that we're going to have, or I'm introducing, I feel honored because when I came up in the NAACP, you had a bunch of people that set the standard of how the NAACP should be ran. And one of them, we're graced to have her presence here, Ms. Jane English. She's the fellow of the NAACP. I believe she's the program manager for the Environmental and Climate Action Network. And I want to turn it over to her to do a small talk, but please hold your questions. If you have any, put them in the chat. I'll make sure I bring them back around. But Ms. English is going to share a little bit about herself. She's been very active in the NAACP for a while now. So to have her back in this time is not only critical, but as we already shared earlier with certain deadlines for grants, I think it's more than is doing us justice as the NAACP to make sure we have the experts involved. Ms. English? I think you're muted.
Right. Thank you so much. I am Jane English. I bring greetings from the NAACP National Office. President, excuse me here. Hold on here. I gotta be able to see my screen, you know. President Barnett, thank you for being here and having me as one of your guests. Karen Kaplan and fellow guests. Our moderator, thank you. So I'm not going to take up much time. I have been with the NAACP. I was a youth council president and state conference president, so I go way back. I was a Karen NAACP member in those days. But I am grateful to be working for the association at the national level. And thank you for this invitation. I won't take up much time. We have a lot to get done here tonight. Do you want me to go ahead and start what I was going to do? Yes. Okay.
Yes,
so let me
please.
see if I can share my screen. Hold tight. You cannot. Oh, it says you cannot share a screen while others are sharing. Oh, this is not good.
Hold on just one moment.
What I will say while I'm waiting to get that straightened out, I'm very honored to be here with our fellow panelists. I think we have a lot to learn tonight, myself included. And so I really am looking forward to this. So what do I need to do here about, it says you cannot share screen while the other participant is sharing. So what do I need to do here?
I think Karen Jones has to give you access.
You should
Okay.
be able to share now.
Okay. Oh, thank you. I hope it turns up to the one I need. Okay, here we go. First of all, I'm honored to be a part of this panel. I have been working for the NAACP some time now, and this is my second tour with the association. And we take this issue very seriously. Now, let's see here. How can I get my slides to move forward? Oh, nope, moved way too forward. Sorry, you all. I'm not being very professional here. I do bring greetings from the NAACP National Office. Our chair, Leon Russell, and our president and CEO, Derek Johnson. Kathy Eglin, the chair of the NAACP Board Committee and Climate Justice Board Committee, our director, Bray Connor. We work at the Center of Environmental and Climate Justice. So we have a lot of work going on with the association in this area. We've been working on transit equity for some time. I'm trying to get my slides to advance. Yeah. This is not what I had in mind. And I practiced. Okay, so EPA's Clean Bus Program and the NAACP interest. Some of our other presenters may provide some of this information, but with funding from the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, EPA's new Clean School Bus Program provides $5 billion over the next 5 years. So that's between 2022 and 2026 to replace existing school buses with zero emissions and low emission models. Black communities continue to suffer disproportionately from the impacts of climate and environmental pollution. This program is an opportunity to create a better future for Black youth. State conferences, branches, and units can ensure that NAACP perspectives are centered and prioritized in conversations regarding implementation and next steps. And so our primary interest has to do with the health impacts that the existing buses have. Current asthma rates are greatest among Blacks, American Indians, Alaskan Natives, and lowest among Asian population. Nonetheless, everybody is suffering from the exhaust of the existing school buses. So why clean school buses? There are nearly 25 million children in over 480 school buses across the country. Almost all school buses currently run on diesel, 95%. Diesel is a fossil fuel that has been linked to a number of illnesses, including asthma, bronchitis, cancer, and other respiratory diseases. For young people, their lungs are still developing and they're more vulnerable to diesel's less lethal impact. However, many Black youth ride school buses that are fueled by diesel-based fuels, using diesel-based fuels. Traffic pollution from diesel cars, trucks, buses is the #1 source of carbon emissions in the United States and is almost twice as lethal as car accidents. So here, there's the benefits of clean school buses. Moving to an all-electric school bus fleet across the country could prevent 5.3 million tons. Hear that? 5.3 million tons of pollution per year. Electric school buses cost nearly 19 cents per gallon to operate, while diesel buses cost approximately 82 cents per gallon. We create green jobs within communities with clean school buses. Now, this graphic I can send out later. I'm not going to go through it. We have some very deep diving panelists tonight, but I did want to get through a little bit of this. So where did the awards go so far? Now, this is just a picture on the map. So it looks like the Northeast has got a little bit and the Southeast got a little bit. Look at Virginia. We still got a ways to go to get clean school buses in the state of Virginia. And so the different mechanisms available to support districts in acquiring electric school buses are grants, rebates, vouchers, and financing. And each one has its advantages and disadvantages. And I believe some of our panelists may cover some of this tonight. But one of the things we want people to know is that it's not a slam dunk, #1. But #2, it's very important for us to engage in this process immediately. because we have to get away from fossil fuels. Our children are dying. How to engage with the school board member and school staff. School districts have to engage with stakeholders on important decisions under the Every Student Succeeds Act. The school board adopts rules and policies, which are called board policies, that govern school employees and students. The school board must ensure that its board policies do not conflict with the laws or with rules adopted by the State Department of Education. One of the things I will say is that we have, gazillions of members, well over 2 million, and many of our 2 million members are engaged in education activity, environmental and climate justice, and health work, and therefore are accustomed to engaging with public officials. And this time we want to be ready when we go in one more time about an issue that is grossly impacting our community and our children. So what does it mean for the NAACP? How to use our voice within webinars. We are going to engage in public engagement and awareness, as you all always do in the Commonwealth of Virginia, data collection. And I'm sure some of our allies that are on the call tonight are perfectly engaged in this. And I didn't say hello to the allies, pardon me, but data collection on what people are seeing and hearing. And after webinars, letters to school board members, public comment, op-eds, and blogs. And our guests tonight are very, very proficient and well prepared to discuss with us tonight on how to engage at a deeper level. And it can look like what is the school district's responsibility, buying the fleet of school buses, asking the EPA for funding for school buses. Typically, the school bus fleet director can make decisions regarding electric school bus needs, and what we can do is set up a meeting with the school district lead for buses, make public comment at school board meetings, send letters to county officials, county boards of education, and school boards. And I'm sure our allies tonight will have another list that will guide us through a successful process of gaining clean school buses in our school districts. So, we say we fight, we win. And we want to encourage every single leader on this call to engage in this particular campaign. We have some very, very well put together experts on this call tonight that will help guide the work, as well as explain to us how we can go about being successful at gaining clean school buses in the Commonwealth of Virginia. I want to thank you all for having me tonight. And I would like to thank the panelists, Sharon, for letting me share this panel with you. And thank you for the invitation from the Commonwealth of Virginia State Conference of NAACP. I look forward to working with you.
Thank you, Jane. And I will stop and I guess I'll lead off with a question, because we're going to go to Carolina next. Not a question. I know me and you kind of briefly talked, and I think it's a good time or segue to point out something I think that is an important detail to your local branches or people on the call of overgeneralizing about the population that is being serviced by electrification. I know you had said something earlier how not all African-American communities are disadvantaged in things of that magnitude. So when we move forward in that grant policy lens, I didn't know if you want to hit or mention what you had shared earlier about, of course, not all neighborhoods look the same, or not all Black people are poor, et cetera, as we get into this deeper dive of the conversation. Okay, so I'm guessing.
Were you?
I was going to kick it back, but I think we keep it moving and go to Carolina.
That's what I thought you said.
So I will share this as before we move to Carolina. Karen Camplin will be sending out the branch president's details on how to access our growing database, which will consist of templates, materials, and things you can use for advocacy, including PowerPoint presentations and letters to your elected officials, what Jane had already pointed out to you. So stay on the lookout, or make sure you tap into your branch presidents, because that information will be coming from your state conference. I also wanted to shout out, before I introduce Carolina, we do have partners on the line. I did see that the World Resource Institute of Electric School Bus Initiative is it's online. I see Hampton, Virginia is represented. In my hometown, 7098, I see Kim is on as well from Norfolk, VA. But I think this is the moment I've been waiting for personally. I've had various conversations about electrification and things going on when it comes to school buses. And every name that keeps popping up is Carolina. We had set up 7 different panelists to have this conversation today, and every panelist yielded their time to Carolina. I'm not trying to put too much pressure on you, Carolina, but we do have branches here. Carolina is the coalition manager for the Alliance for Electric School Buses. And when I say it's not only highly recommended, there's nothing but praise shared about her work. And Carolina, you have a lot of members here that want to get engaged, that are allies to the environmental change. And I went to the website to see about the Alliance for Electric School Bus and kind of share some history. So I know you're going to take us into a deeper dive, but at the beginning, can you kind of tell us the impact and the work that you guys do, and take it from here? I know you want to share your screen too, I believe.
Thank you so much, Joe. I really appreciate it. And I'm very grateful for the opportunity to be with you all tonight. I'm always excited to get to talk about electric school buses, especially with folks whom I haven't gotten the chance to talk with before. So this is a really great opportunity, and I'm looking forward to hearing your questions, your thoughts, your comments as we dig into this. I just want to highlight before I start that there will be 2 opportunities for questions. I'm kind of going to run through electric school buses generally first, pause for questions on that, and then dig into the EPA Clean School Bus Program, which is, I know, the funding opportunity that is most urgent before us today. As I dig into that, I want to start by just talking a little bit about the Alliance for Electric School Buses. Really appreciate that introduction, Joe. It's our honor to get to do this work and to do it with so many different partners. Who we are is a coalition of not-for-profit advocates at the national level, folks that work locally, statewide, regionally, and nationally, who have been specifically dedicated to an equitable transition of the nation's school bus fleet. What does an equitable transition look like to us? To us, it means putting electric school buses in the communities that have been most polluted by diesel and other forms of pollution, and starting there. That's where we want to see electric school buses begin. We also think that this is a really great opportunity to create well-paying careers with family-sustaining benefits for workers in the manufacturing industry, and we want to ensure that those benefits come to the communities that have been historically excluded from the manufacturing industry. So we've been doing this work since about 2016, 2017, when a number of our organizations started working on getting states to use the Volkswagen settlement to invest in electric school buses. That work then expanded in 2019 when we started working with then Senator Kamala Harris on her Clean School Bus Act bill, which actually became the basis for the EPA's Clean School Bus Program when the infrastructure law was passed. So we've been working mostly, again, at local level and federal levels in getting electric school bus funding situated so that school districts can begin this transition, because we want to see this transition happen as soon as possible, but again, in a way that is equitable, and that puts those that have been most impacted first. These are just some of our members. We have folks that work throughout the country in over 40 states, and again, at all kinds of different levels. Some are labor groups, some are equity groups, some are environmental groups. We have a wide variety of members, and we are, again, laser focused, not just on seeing electric school buses go wherever someone wants them, but in the communities that most need them. I'm going to run through some of the benefits of electric school buses, but Jane already did a really great job talking about this, so I'll run through this a little bit more quickly. I just want to highlight again why we're doing this, why we're involved. For us, it's really about children's health. Diesel school buses are extremely polluting. They are much more polluting than you would find with a child riding in a regular car to school. And diesel pollution predominantly harms low-income communities as well as Black, Latinx, and Indigenous communities that are more likely to be more susceptible to the impacts of diesel pollution. We've also recently seen a study that showed that diesel pollution can even impact student attendance in school. When they retrofitted older diesel buses to be a little bit cleaner, they found that school attendance actually went up because diesel pollution was having an impact in those places that were already suffering so much from pollution. It was hurting students' ability to go to school because of asthma attacks and other respiratory illnesses. So we think that this is a really important opportunity to begin prioritizing children's health. Electric school buses produce zero tailpipe emissions, which is incredibly important. And they are the better option and the cleanest option on the market for our children. If there was something cleaner, we'd be advocating for that. But electric school buses are right now the cleanest option on the market, and they're the best option for our kids. We also know that, again, not to hit the nail on the head too hard, but for our coalition, this is really important because we know that Black children, Latino children are more likely to end up in the hospital. They're more likely to die because of asthma. And so this is an issue of life or death for many of our communities. Diesel pollution also impacts them at a time when children's lungs and brains are still developing. And so it can have lifelong impacts that can reverberate through people's lives. And again, if we start in the communities that have most suffered because of diesel pollution, because of where highways have been placed, because of where communities have been redlined, then we can begin to address some of the injustices that the transportation system in the United States has unfortunately really advanced through its history. Jane already mentioned some of this, but just to highlight again that electric school buses cut greenhouse gas emissions, which are the ones that harm or accelerate climate change. Switching every school bus in the country would have significant benefits. It would be like taking about 1 million cars off the road, which is huge. School buses are also our nation's largest form of public transportation, so this can have a huge impact across the entire transportation system. And this is according to studies done by different organizations, including the Union of Concerned Scientists, US PIRG. We also know that WRI has also done studies into this to show how much cleaner electric school buses are, even accounting for their life cycle emissions. So not just in what they do running, but what they do in their entire manufacturing and production. As well as workforce, this is really important for us. We think that, again, this is a really important opportunity to highlight the impact that this is going to have on manufacturing workers there and drivers as well. There are over 300,000 drivers throughout the country. And for them, for folks that are driving these school buses day in and day out, this also presents an opportunity to improve their public health and provide also a cleaner and quieter work environment. We can also train drivers and upskill them into the skills of the future, actually of the present, while at the same time ensuring that they have a positive experience with the electric vehicles that they're driving. In addition, we believe that the manufacturing industry, there are thousands of workers who are going to move from manufacturing diesel buses to electric school buses. And this is, again, a great opportunity to bring into this industry folks that have been historically excluded, ensure that they have careers that provide good wages with benefits that can sustain a family, that have a voice in their workplace, that can join a workplace that is actually doing a much better job. And this is something that we as a coalition push the manufacturing industry to do and have been pushing EPA to push the manufacturing industry to do, to really ensure that these jobs, as folks are transitioning, we're also bringing in, again, folks that can be promoted and retained in this industry. So not just brought in at the lowest level and kept there, but that can actually be promoted through the industry to make sure that we are prioritizing, again, those communities that have been traditionally excluded. We know that in manufacturing, there's actually a higher share of Black workers in automobile manufacturing than in the rest of the population. And so this could be particularly important for folks to really be able to move into a new industry that is continuing to grow and to produce benefits. And again, just another impact to the workforce is that electric school buses actually can save money for school districts, and that's because they require less maintenance, they have fewer moving parts, you don't need to buy fuel, and it can help folks learn a new specialized skill. And especially with this new kind of training, these are skills that can be transferable to other sectors of transit and truck driving, that we believe that, again, we can provide an opportunity for folks to really learn something that can help them throughout the rest of their careers. So to recap, why are electric school buses good? Well, obviously, we're talking about cleaner air and cleaner environment, which is important for our communities, but especially for children whose lungs and brains are still developing. We can also produce cost savings for school districts through a low or total cost of ownership throughout the life cycle of the bus. Because of savings on fuel and maintenance, we can reduce environmental pollution that is causing other harms across our communities. We can make this a quieter environment for children, which is particularly great for kids who don't hear well or have any other sort of learning ability that not having this diesel engine roaring in their ears is actually really helpful for them. And it's also better for the drivers to be able to make sure they know what's going on in the bus. But most importantly, why now? Well, we know that school districts every year are switching out their aging fleets, and there is this funding opportunity, which I'll touch on in a little bit. And so that is one of the reasons that we want to make sure that we take advantage of this opportunity while it is here. And again, the Clean School Bus Program is only going to run through 2026 unless we can get it extended. So why do it now? Because we've got the funding. Before we dig into the Clean School Bus Program, I know that there are some questions that in every single webinar, every single opportunity we hear from folks about electric school buses. So I wanted to take the opportunity to run through some of those. We can get further into details if folks would like, but again, just want to provide a baseline understanding of electric school buses. So how much do they cost? Really ranges in price depending on the vehicle type and the many ways that you can get them customized, but the range right now is about $250 to $475. EPA funding provides about $375 for a school bus, assuming that that's the cost of a new electric school bus, the bigger models. Charging stations, again, this can really vary. You can see this range, but depending on how fast you want them to charge the bus, there's a huge difference in price, depending on if they're also going to be enabled for vehicle to grid purposes, a huge range as well, but you're looking at a few $1,000s. And funding usually provides between $10,000 to $20,000, at least from the EPA, towards that charging infrastructure. What is their range? Again, another question that we get very often. Manufacturers list ranges that can go up to or well into the 200 miles, but really it depends on the battery size. And the most common battery size that we see is about 100 miles that you can count on day in and day out, which is enough for the majority of bus routes throughout the country. There are some examples, obviously, where that might not work because of field trips. There are ways to manage that through the ways that you charge the school buses, but obviously it's dependent on the individual case of each school district. As batteries improve, and they've continued to improve over the last few years, and they've also continued to drop in price, we expect range to improve as well. And it's also important to note that the Biden-Harris administration is also making sure to put charging stations in main corridors, highways, throughout communities. There's a big effort to do that as well. That will hopefully benefit some of these electric school buses. And again, how much money do they save? It really depends on the school district, but we've seen ranges from 40 to 80% on fuel and maintenance. There are just fewer things that you need to buy, fewer things to maintain. And again, electricity pricing is a lot more stable than diesel pricing, which we've seen shoot up over the last few years, especially through, geopolitical events that are kind of outside of our control. Nearly 70% of spending also on electricity remains within local and regional economies, according to the Southern Alliance for Clean Energy. So it's important to note that money that's spent on electricity stays more locally than money that gets spent on fossil fuels. A few other questions. How do they run? How do they do with hills? We hear this all the time. It's a really good question. So far, electric school buses do pretty well, and bus drivers are pretty confident taking them up hills. They have regenerative braking, which is something that drivers do have to get trained on. It's not braking the same way on a regular bus, but they're able to handle those hills a little bit better because of their torque, as well as the stored energy that you get from going downhill can recharge the battery. So again, the way that we train drivers with electric school buses can really have an impact on that battery range as well. What about cold weather? Again, another great question. We see electric school buses in many areas with cold weather, including Michigan, Minnesota, Alaska. It does have cold weather can and will have an impact on your battery range, but there are ways to mitigate that. And it really depends on how you're maintaining, one, the heating inside the bus, which you can do through diesel heaters or electric heaters. You can also make sure that your batteries are really maintained at their appropriate temperature so that they're performing at their best. And again, there are ways to do that so that you're mitigating that impact and getting the most out of your range. A lot of that comes through training, learning, and repeating. But so far, electric school buses are operating pretty well in cold weather. You just have to plan for that ahead of time so that you make sure you get the range that you need. A couple other questions that we also hear: how often will the battery need to be replaced? Folks are estimating 12 to 15 years. And again, usually this will be covered under warranty, at least for 3 years, but most school districts sometimes opt for an extended warranty that can ensure that they don't have to replace that battery again for quite some time. And again, 12 to 15 years, that's about how much you expect a diesel bus to run, although some diesel buses, of course, are run for much longer periods of time. So you see that this is pretty normal compared to what you already see with diesels. What is going to impact that battery range and how long is it going to last? Well, again, the climate, so your weather, your terrain, again, if you're able to plan ahead for this, which you will need to plan ahead for electric school buses, and also how your drivers are riding or driving the bus, that will all have an impact on the battery. And as drivers have learned more about this, as there's more training available to drivers, that has also really improved so that you're getting the most that you can out of those batteries. And kind of like cell phones, we've all learned, the cell phones themselves sometimes now say we're not going to charge fully to 100%. It's the same with these batteries. There are tips that you can learn as you're training to make sure that you get the most out of those batteries. And again, we're seeing more of our societies run through these batteries, so that knowledge is also getting a lot better. How are they maintained? Well, mechanics do need to be trained for how to manage an electric motor, a battery system, some of the different parts. There are parts that are going to be the same, and so they will already know how to do that. In some cases, you train your mechanics to do that, usually for larger school districts. Sometimes school districts just opt to go with whatever package the dealer or the manufacturing is providing. But again, there's already over 3,000 electric school buses on the road throughout the country. So maintenance folks now are much more understanding of how to do that. And again, the warranty, at least 3 years, potentially more, and that really depends on the needs of the school district. But these are some of the questions that I know we get all the time. Want to be honest about some of the barriers to electric school buses, right? This isn't easy. It's a new technology. There are learning curves and there are speed bumps along the way. But again, we have learned so much in the last few years as electric school buses have become more commonplace. And there's still so much more that we need to do to make sure that they do become the American standard, as the White House says that they want to make. The biggest barrier is obviously the upfront cost of an electric school bus. There's just no denying that an electric school bus costs several times more than a diesel bus. And again, there's also a few other things to consider into that. There's the charging stations, which also require additional infrastructure and equipment. There might be electrical upgrades that you need to make in the bus depot or through the utility. And then there's the planning and project management. Electric school buses, again, being a newer technology, they're going to take staff time. They're going to take planning. They're going to take management throughout this deployment as folks get more comfortable with them. But again, there are ways to mitigate this, and this is what we're here to talk about today. There's federal funding. There's at least one program at the EPA dedicated exclusively to electric school buses, which is the Clean School Bus Program. There's also a Clean Heavy Duty Vehicles program that EPA is looking to launch soon, where school buses could also be eligible for funding. That's $1 billion. The IRS is also going to release some more information about tax credits that school districts will be able to take advantage of, but potentially it could be issued as a direct payment, and it could be up to $40,000. But again, we're awaiting on some more guidance on that. But again, these are incentives available at the federal level that can be stacked with state and local funding, as well as funding from utilities. In Virginia, of course, the Volkswagen settlement has funded a number of electric school buses already on your roads. And then Dominion Energy and other utilities also have several programs specific to electric school buses that folks can take advantage of. And there's a way to do this so that you're stacking these incentives and using them so that you are getting at this issue of the capital expenditures that you're going to have to make. But again, it's also really, really important to note that there is a price to using fossil fuel buses, and it's a cost to our children's health, to our environment, even to their academic futures, because of the impact that diesel pollution can have on school attendance and even test scores. And so, yes, electric school buses have a higher sticker price, but they also have benefits that we're not quantifying when we're talking just about that sticker price. And so just want to highlight that as well. And then secondly, infrastructure. We know that this is another piece that continues to pose issues for school districts. There is a lot that you have to do to get charging infrastructure ready to deploy those electric school buses. And again, on a case-by-case basis, it really depends on the school district, depends on the utility, depends on if it's rural or urban, if it's a larger utility, a smaller utility. There are many factors that go into this, but there are many things that a school district might need to do: trenching, wiring, In some cases, you know, bringing on new substations that a utility might need to put on because of a larger fleet deployment. And all of these things take time, they take money, they take resources, and they're not something that school districts are used to have to dealing with, because it's not something that, again, you have to deal with diesel buses. But again, there are ways to mitigate some of these barriers. There's a lot of planning that can be done. Advocates are really starting to dig into what do the ideal utility programs look like? What are the things that we need to see improved? And for one thing that we're doing as well is really pushing utilities to create programs that are based on inclusive investments that are able to fund charging infrastructure without really burdening the ratepayer or the utilities customers. And doing so that in a way that you're helping school districts get ready for these deployments, but again, without making someone else pay for it while the utility gets to profit. And so there are different ways to approach this. It continues to be a problem. It's not something that we've solved completely, but we are working on it, understanding that infrastructure is absolutely critical to the success of an electric school bus deployment, and understanding that the EPA funding, while it provides a lot of good resources for this, there's a lot more on the utility side that we need to look at that can continue to be a barrier for some school districts, especially if the utility is maybe not on board with electrification. That can pose a problem, and we want to be honest about that. I also, before we dig into questions, want to talk a little bit about Virginia. Y'all might be already aware of this, but if you're not, just wanted to highlight again what the situation looks like in Virginia. So already in Virginia, you've got 152 electric school buses that have been committed or deployed. That's as of September 2022, thanks to a study that CalSTART and WRI just did and released a couple weeks ago. In the EPA Clean School Bus Program, the rebates from last year, which EPA released and actually announced out of Falls Church, Virginia, they ended up awarding 11 school districts funding for 82 electric school buses, which totaled to about $32 million. There are still 52 school districts from Virginia on the wait list that are requesting over 400 school buses, 300 of those which are electric. Dominion has programs funding the electric school bus infrastructure. I mentioned this one because it's the most popular and has actually funded a good number of the 152 electric school buses that you're going to see in the state. So a lot of folks have experience with this particular program. And then I also wanted to mention some of the school districts. We were able to work with folks at Sierra Club to do an analysis of which are the school districts across the country that are in non-attainment status, which is a very specific EPA term, but a non-attainment status for ozone and particulate matter pollution. And you can see here the school districts that fall into that category. And this is just looking at the very latest non-attainment standards. So if you go back even further, there's even more that we could add to this list. But again, these are some of the school districts that we know are struggling with ozone and particulate matter pollution, which are predominantly caused by diesel. And so these are some of the school districts that we would love to see actually transition to electric school buses because of the amount of pollution that they're breathing in. And then I wanted to share again just a few case studies that we've seen from school districts in Virginia. So in Louisa County, you've got 2 electric school buses. It's a very rural school district with a smaller student population, but they say that they've been seeing cost savings of about $5,000 per year in maintenance and fuel costs. The buses have been returning with, at least a quarter of their charge remaining, which has been helpful. But they are saying that scrappage requirements is one thing that's preventing them from investing in more school buses because they can't afford to scrap any of the buses that they've got. And there are ways that the EPA program is kind of looking around that, but again, just want to mention one of the barriers that they've been very upfront about, but have had a positive experience so far. Fairfax County, this one, I think a lot of folks might have already heard about. They've got electric school buses and at least 10 more on the way. They're a little bit larger. They've been getting their funding through Dominion. The buses are all meant to be used as potential grid assets. So the batteries, Dominion would like them to actually store energy, and then when they're not being used, feed that energy back into the grid and use that. It could be a source of revenue, but in this case, Dominion actually owns the school bus batteries, and so they get to use that stored energy to support the grid. In other places, it depends on how these arrangements are structured, but some school districts could actually sell that storage. In this case, because Dominion paid for some of this funding, that's how they get the batteries and get to use that. Fairfax has been honest that, when they have below freezing temperatures, they really have to look at their battery range and readjust. And so that's something that they're looking at, but they're constantly learning more about this and improving as they go along. Locust Hill, they have 4 electric school buses, very small school district. Again, they went through Dominion Energy, but they actually provided an example here of how much they're saving in those fuel costs. And you can look at, those differences between what they're paying for in electricity versus what they would have paid for in diesel. And that's it. I wanted to pause here to see if there are any questions on just electric school buses generally, their benefits, how they run, anything else. So I'm checking the chat now. I'm not seeing any questions, but if folks have questions, please feel free to unmute yourself and let me know.
So what I'm going to do, Carolina, is give you like a 2-minute break and do shout outs. I don't even know where to go from here because the information that you just shared is so great. But what I'm going to do is acknowledge some of our partners, and then come back and ask the question that I have myself for you to help with the local branches. And then hopefully that kind of gets the conversation started up with Q&A between you and Jane and others. First, I want to make sure that I do recognize Natalie on behalf of our President Barnett. I think Jeff McKay, who's the chairman of the Board of Supervisors, she's representing his office. We have the Harrisonburg branch, the Pennsylvania branch is also on. We have an ally in the Blue Green Alliance. I will be remiss if I do not change what I said. My wife came down here, President Barnett, and made sure I said this correctly. I want to give a shout out to the Alpha Beta Alpha, AKA Sorority Incorporated, Springfield. I didn't say it correctly, apparently, but I just did, okay? Then I wanted to make sure that we recognize Teray with Clean Energy Works, as well as, I had her name as well, Lexi. They're both helping out right now with the Q&A portion in chat. So if you have a Q&A, make sure you shoot it in there. Right now, they work with Clean Energy Works, and what they do is they help with implementations of utilities to make sure that they're inclusive in investments for transportation, including school buses. I know what Carolina already shared earlier was the partnership, and you saw Dominion a lot. Dominion is one of the key sponsors, I believe, for the Virginia State Conferences at NAACP. So make sure you guys are making that connection as well. Carolina, I saw you had some examples up, and I wanted to start off, and I know we have some questions here as well. You did some great examples of local governments, and I was going to ask you from a high level. Of course, we have local governments, and then we have local small areas, and then we have some larger areas like Richmond, Northern Virginia, or Hampton Roads. What would you recommend to your environmental justice chairs with the NAACP on how to get some of this important work started? I think obviously for a larger metropolitan area, it's a lot easier for Dominion to fill the investment compared to the local ones that you have pointed out that they still did the investment. But what will be the starting point for some of these environmental justice chairs to get the ball rolling?
Good question. So, I think the biggest thing right now is the EPA funding, right? That's one of the best ways to approach folks is you can apply for funding that will cover up to the full cost of an electric school bus and and the charging station. If you apply for the grants, you can get funding for a lot more than that. If you apply just for the rebates, then you can just get that funding covered. But it's a way to get a new electric school bus. And if you don't have one right now, this is the time to really pilot a program. Because of the benefits that you can see in cost savings, because of the benefits that you can see to the environment, and because the funding opportunity is really there. Thinking about environmental justice communities, as they're called, for example, looking at what your sources of pollution are and what those problems are causing, and being able to put together a competitive grant application, you already have a very strong case to make because you're already in an area where you're suffering from that pollution. If you're particularly applying for the grants, and I'm happy to talk about the grants a little bit more still, then being in one of these areas of non-attainment actually gives you a few more points in your application. So that's really important. But I think really thinking about this in terms of there's funding available that's really only for school buses. So without having to dip into funding that, could come out of the education budget, out of the classroom's budget, there are funding programs that will just make sure that you get essentially, in some cases, the cost of a free electric school bus or the incremental cost of what you would have spent the difference between an electric and a diesel bus. And that can really tell you, what is this like? Is this right for me? And help you understand whether this is a good opportunity for you or not, whether it's, good for the rest of your fleet, or how quickly you can move. I think that the best thing that you can do is really say, there are electric school buses already in Virginia, but we want to bring them to the communities that are most suffering from pollution, and kind of start from there. And again, every instance is really also going to depend on what are the priorities for that person or for that district. What is it that they're really laser focused on? Because then you can kind of target the case based on that. There are 1,000 different ways that you could go about this, but I think the most important one is there's funding out there, right? So right now there's this opportunity to do this. And this funding is going to get distributed throughout the country, but we want to see it in these communities, and we want to bring it here.
So I want to try to merge some of these questions, Carolina, because I think I have 5. I recognized 5 of them, and I'm going to try to sum them up. Some of the questions come from, I think, Brenda Dixon and Evelyn Spain, and I'm going to try to merge them together. How do you convince your board of supervisors? How do you convince your school board members to get engaged or get behind these initiatives?
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of resources that you're going to need, right? First of all, to convince anyone, you're going to need to educate yourself on electric school buses. So that's the first thing to do. And there are a lot of resources that I know the Alliance has, that different members in Virginia might have, that the NAACP might have, that WRI has. There are a number of resources out there to get you started on learning about electric school buses, answering any of the questions that you might have. WRI has a sample pitch deck that you can take and customize to present. I think really any board of supervisors, the biggest question they're going to ask about is probably the total cost of ownership. And so they're going to ask for some financial analyses. There are also tools out there that help you calculate that. The federal government has some through A-Fleet. WRI also can really guide folks through that. There are nonprofit organizations that can sit down with you and kind of make the case based on a total cost of ownership, just by crunching some numbers. But that total cost of ownership is really impossible to calculate without knowing specifics about that school district, because you have to look into things like, the bus routes, the size of the school bus fleet, a number of different things, your electric grid mix, and there are a number of different things that essentially go into that calculation. But really, when you're talking to a board of supervisors, one of the biggest things that they're going to ask about is the cost, the lifetime cost, the upfront cost. They're going to want to know about those funding opportunities. And again, that's what we're going to talk about in a little bit. So hopefully you're also able to provide that, like, yes, there's a cost, and here's the funding that you can go get it. Many times folks also need to see community support. And that's really, really important. You want to involve your community. You want to have community members. You want to have parents. You want to have students that can share their personal experiences, potentially suffering from asthma, living next to a highway or another source of pollution, and share why this would benefit them and why they want to see this. And so those personal stories can also be really moving for board of supervisors, because they care about their communities, right? Ideally, that's why they're serving. And so they're going to want to hear those personalized stories. So I think those 3 things, and again, being able to talk about the total cost of ownership, run some numbers, being able to talk about the benefits to the community, and being able to talk about the funding that's available, that can make a persuasive case.
Definitely. I think I have 1 or 2 more for you, Carolina, before I turn it back over. I will be remiss if I did not say that Karen is about to drop a survey link in the chat now. Make sure that you take that survey and share it with your branches, share it with your organizations. We have a question here, Carolina, from Edith White, who runs the Hampton Roads Community Foundation. I said HRCAP, Community Action Program. What are the opportunities for workforce development? Are there any examples of workforce programs, or there's funding or training for these programs as well? I guess when it comes to Association of Electrification and things like that.
Yeah, so for workforce, really a lot of the training right now is coming from the manufacturers themselves. There are a few other colleges that have some of these courses. If it's specific to electric school buses, the manufacturers are really the ones that are doing that kind of training. And so that it really depends on your relationship with the manufacturer. If you already have an electric school bus, that's how you're going to get the training. But again, a lot of these opportunities are ensuring that folks that are currently working as diesel manufacturing, one, manufacturers are being pushed to transition into producing electric school buses. And so these workers will need to be trained. And that's something that we also want to ensure we're really talking with manufacturers about. The EPA actually has out there now a questionnaire that they're asking electric school bus manufacturers to fill out to let them know more about their workforce. What does your current workforce look like? What are wages like? Are workers free to join a union? Things like that, to kind of really understand the landscape of the workforce right now. And so really focusing on how we're able to help those that are going to transition into new jobs, and how those jobs can also be good jobs, right? We don't want this to be a race to the bottom. We want these to be jobs that have benefits, that have advancement opportunities. We want them to be recruiting and promoting from communities that have been historically disadvantaged. When it comes to the mechanics and the drivers, it's really reliant upon the school district that purchases electric school buses to make sure that they get the training they need from their manufacturer or their dealer. And there are resources for folks to demand that, but those are the folks that have the training abilities, and you need to make sure that you get that training for your drivers. The EPA is also trying to make sure that school districts plan ahead of time for that. And so that's something that they're encouraging folks in the grant process to really look at and provide a plan for. How are you going to train your workers? How are you going to retain your workers? Now, there's a lot more work that needs to be done to make sure that there are these workforce development opportunities in place. And so it takes working with colleges, it takes working with online academies, it takes working with folks that certify these workers to make sure that they're also providing education for this from folks that maybe aren't currently already in the industry. And there's a lot more work to do there to make sure that that's available.
Thank you. Thank you. And I think I'm going to merge this question as well from Brenda and not Evelyn, I think Erica. And the question was, could you do a pilot program? And I guess on top of that, has there been any innovation done, or as it pertains to, can you flip a diesel bus into an electric bus?
Yes. So definitely, if you're asking about with EPA funding, can you do a pilot study? Yes. So the rebates and the grants, they're particularly the rebate round. You saw school districts that had zero electric school buses in their fleet apply and get funding for that. You saw states, there were about 12 states that had no electric school buses anywhere in their state that applied, their school districts applied and got funding for that. And they're just testing out one bus. So with the rebate round, that was really possible. With the grants round, there is a minimum of 15 school buses that a school district has to apply for, but that's if they're a singular school district. I think I also saw a question somewhere in there, and can you get school districts to band together and apply as a group? You can. And it's happened in some cases. I think it's Michigan or Minnesota. We've seen that the Nonprofit Transportation Association, they're actually put together a grant proposal, not through EPA funding, but through some other funding for multiple school districts. And so was able to get a number of them, 1 or 2 buses, but the Nonprofit Transportation Association actually handled that grant. That's something that you can do through this new EPA grant as well, which again, I'll get into this in just a sec, but you can apply through a third party. It could be a manufacturer, it could be a dealer, it could be a private bus service. And if you only just want one school bus, you could ask for that, because third-party applicants are required to apply to serve at least 4 different school districts. And so if you don't have 15 buses that you want to commit to replacing, you just have 1 or 2, you could still apply through that third-party program for the EPA grants. So you can do that. And then for repowering school buses, yes, there have been a few companies that have started actually taking old diesel buses and taking out the diesel engine and putting in an electric powertrain, electric motor, and they're repowering them. And they do have a lower upfront cost than a brand new purpose-built electric school bus. They are an option. Unfortunately, they are not funded by the EPA Clean School Bus Program, but there are other federal programs like DERA that could be used for funding repowered school buses. Right now, they're only on the road, from my understanding, in New York, and there's only about 5 on the road so far. So they're in their very early stages, but we do think it's a very promising technology. It has a lower upfront cost, so it could be a huge solution for school districts that just aren't going to be able to get the funding in time to maybe, fund a completely new school bus. But again, it's still in its early stages, very promising. We think it can be a really great avenue for folks, but we're still seeing how those buses run. And obviously there's a lot of details that are going to go into that, because, we want to see them on the road for a little bit.
Definitely. And I think the last one I have, Carolina, and I think we're done after this. Will information be shared regarding all of the funding resources? And I think that's more of a Karen Kaplan, but I'm pretty sure it will be.
Yes, I'm definitely about to launch into the Clean School Bus program, so I can share about that program and the grants and the rebates. We can share you information for where to look up other funding sources in Virginia that are specific to Virginia. WRI has a really great clearinghouse for that, and so we can share that so that you can see what those programs look like in Virginia. There are different rules. For example, the federal funding, you can't stack it with other federal funding except for the tax credits. State programs might have different rules about that as well, so you might not be able to combine funding sources in some cases. It kind of depends, but we can definitely provide more information about what those other funding sources might be. I'll be honest, I don't think we have like one great fact sheet that lists all of them for Virginia, but we can point you to those resources so that you can look up what is available in your state, and figure out which might make the most sense.
Definitely. We're going to add that the information you share, I know is going to be great. And I know Jane also has one as well that she's going to send to Karen as a funding chart for the NAACP, so we're going to attack that as well. And I think we have addressed all the Q&A. Carolina, I think I speak for everyone, and I'm definitely going to hand it over to President Barnett. I can't thank you enough. I think I've learned so much about electrification of school buses. Now I have me a little pocket rocket now of how I can advocate for electric buses. But thank you for your time. I want to turn it over to President Barnett and the leadership of the Virginia State Conference and NAACP now.
Thank you, Joe. It's been a great presentation. I've seen all of the comments and the questions, and it's just really a magnificent presentation. Thank you, Carolina, for doing such a wonderful job. I want to thank Jane English from the National NAACP office for joining us and providing her information, as well as our own Karen Kamlin, chair of our ECJ committee. And Joe, I just want to thank you again for leading this presentation, and I must say, welcome to Hanover, because it's a great place to do some work with electric school buses. And so I'm gonna turn it over to Karen for any last words that she might want to bring forward. Karen Kamlin, would you come forward?
Yes. Hi. Thank you so much, President Barnett, and thank you so much to all of our participants or panelists. Carolina, the information you provided was amazing, and for Lexi and Taria from Clean Energy Works for providing support. And of course, we're going to be having Lexi and Taria back to talk about the inclusive utility investment solution that Carolina had mentioned in her program. We had originally scheduled an hour for this program, but Carolina had just another small part where she was going to talk about the grants. So I would say, if everybody doesn't mind, and President Barnett, if you don't mind, if we can just go for just a few more minutes just to have that presentation on the grant portion. For folks that need to drop off, we are recording it. Thank you for being flexible with us today, but this is, as we indicated earlier, it's a very dense program. It's very complicated, and it was so important for Carolina and Leader English to kind of lay that foundational groundwork with us today. And it took just a little bit more time, but please bear with us. And Carolina, thank you so much again. And if you don't mind, just giving us a few more minutes of your time so we can go through the 2023 grant section that you have.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Thank you, Karen, and thank you, everyone. I'm going to run through this quickly, but I appreciate your time. I think this is a really important opportunity to talk about. So the Clean School Bus Program was established by the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law of 2021. It allocates $5 billion over the next 5 years through 2026 to replace for the replacement of diesel school buses with electric, propane, or compressed natural gas. Half the funding is absolutely guaranteed for electric only. The other half is available to all of those fuel types. The EPA actually launched this program last year. I believe that Administrator Reagan and VP Harris were actually in Virginia to launch this together. I know that a few folks might have been there. And they launched it through a rebate program. The rebate's a bit of a misnomer. The funding is actually provided upfront before folks have to spend the money itself. But they did fund about almost $1 billion in rebates to over 400 school districts throughout the country. And so that was the first opportunity for the Clean School Bus program. Now there's a grants program, and every year moving forward, EPA expects to do a grants and a rebate program. So this year, the grants program is going to be $400 million. It's a national competition, and so it's a very comprehensive application that's required, a competitive selection. EPA is going to review, score, rank all of the applications that come in. They'll be doing this at a regional level, and then they expect to make about 25 to 50 awards, which again is a huge difference from the rebates when they made over 400 awards. And they're going to do at least 1 or 2 per EPA region. So it's much smaller, but they're targeting larger deployments with this grants opportunity. The applications opened a couple of weeks ago on April 24th and are due August 22nd, which is a 120-day window for school districts to apply. Who is eligible? High notes, public school districts, which includes public charter schools, indigenous tribes, organizations, or Indian controlled schools, and then third parties, which is your manufacturers, dealers, nonprofit transportation associations, as well as private bus fleets. So all these folks can apply for funding for the Clean School Bus program. Prioritization. This is really important and something that our coalition, the Alliance for Electric School Buses, has been hammering EPA about. By law, they are required to prioritize high need or low income school districts, rural school districts, as well as tribal school districts. They also consider any public school district within the U.S. territories to be part of the high need. So they're also all public school districts in U.S. territories are also included within this definition of priority school districts. The EPA has a list of who these school districts are, and there's about 5,500 of them that meet these categories. We had some issues last time where school districts just barely missed the cutoff for 20% or more students living in poverty. EPA has now provided a way for school districts that were cut off because of that to self-certify. I'll go into that in a bit, but I did want to mention that there are 52 school districts in Virginia that are on the EPA's list for this year. I'm not listing them all here, but I can send them to y'all and you can take a look, because those are going to receive priority for funding, which means they receive more points in the application as well as more funding per bus. There are also another 84 Virginia school districts that can self-certify as priority school districts. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. And then these are the 11 school districts that received funding for those 82 electric school buses earlier this year from the 2022 rebates. So y'all might be familiar with these school districts already. And that was, $32 million that came to the state of Virginia. The self-certification, essentially, if a school receives Title I funding, and again, they just missed this cutoff of 20%, then they can self-certify. And EPA specifically has a list of those school districts that can do that. And again, in Virginia, you've got 84 of those, which is pretty high. You've got more school districts that can self-certify than you actually have on the priority list. So that's an important opportunity, again, because these school districts receive more funding per bus. There's specific instructions that school districts have to fill out to do this, but a good opportunity. And something that EPA is finally listening on. How are people going to apply? They're going to be 2 programs. One is for school districts, like I talked about before, for that just singular school districts looking to replace between 15 and 50 school buses. The third party sub-program, again, is for those dealers, manufacturers, private bus fleets, etc. Those folks have to promise that they'll serve at least 4 school districts, and they're requesting between 50 and 100 school bus. They're limited to 1 application per EPA region, but potentially someone like, say, a first student could put in for 100 school buses in every single EPA region, of which there are 10, and that could be 1,000 school buses. So Those are the different programs that EPA has structured. They are providing through the grants program a combined amount of funding to cover both the bus and the infrastructure. These are the amounts. They're very similar to last year. They're basically adding what EPA was providing last year for the bus and the charging station. It's now combined into one amount. So you can see here that for a priority school district, it's $395. For a non-priority school district, it's $250. So for priority school districts, this is a really great opportunity. You're getting pretty much the entire bus covered. And then again, winners are going to get to decide how they split the money. So if you have already some state funding source for your bus and you want to spend more of the funding towards infrastructure, you can really do that. You can choose how you spent that $395 or $250,000. What's covered in infrastructure? Infrastructure is only going to be covered for electric school buses, not for propane or CNG. Any upgrades that the utility needs to do will not be covered through EPA funding, which again, this is where utility funding becomes really important as a gap for what EPA can't cover. Chargers have to be at level 2, they have to be Energy Star certified. And again, these are some of the lists. I'm not going to go through all of them, but there's a lot that goes into charging infrastructure. And through the grants program, you actually see a larger list than you did in the rebates of what school districts can use and cover with this funding. Important to note that you can also use this for labor and permitting, including EVITP certifications for who installs your charging stations. So that's really great. There are a number of other allowable uses. Don't need to go into this too much, but essentially renewable energy systems, battery storage systems, they can be funded through this grants program, which is different than the rebate program. Staff time, staff benefits. There are way more things that you can include in the budget for EPA funding through a grant than you could through a rebate. So again, this is particularly good for school districts that are looking at getting more of the costs covered that go into an actual electric school bus deployment. But with that, it is a harder application. Utilities, EPA is encouraging school districts to begin talking to their utilities yesterday, basically, if they want to apply for this funding, because without your utility support, this is going to be almost impossible to pull off. And they are providing assistance to the joint office as well. They have more resources on that. But again, the utility conversation, really critical to a successful electric school bus deployment. The application process, you need accounts through grants.gov, SAN.gov. Setting these up, if you don't already have them, can take up to a month. And so something that school districts really need to take into account if they're thinking about this. The application itself, there are a number of forms that are required. Then there's a project narrative and budget that has to be maximum of 15 pages. But there's a lot that goes into that, including a number of supporting materials that EPA can ask for. What does that look like? I'm not going to get into every single section, but here's to give you just a preview of how much, to be completely honest, just how much this application process requires. It's a very comprehensive application. You can see each of these is worth a certain amount of points. And so this is really important, but you can get points if you're serving priority school districts, which EPA calls their environmental justice or disadvantaged communities. You can get points for being in an area of non-attainment, for ozone or particulate matter pollution. You can get points for putting together a workforce development plan for how you're going to train and retain your drivers. You can get points for figuring out how climate change is going to impact your project and proactively planning for that. Additional points as well, if you can leverage funding from state, green banks or other sources, other grants, as well as, how you're really tracking your experience, who you're bringing into your team or your consultants that has experience either with federal grants or electrification. All of these things are part of the considerations. And again, I'll be very honest, it's a lot to put together and school districts are going to need technical assistance. There is help out there, but this application process is best suited for school districts that already have some experience or are already interested in electric school buses. Maybe they have a couple, maybe they're very interested or committed to a sustainability. This is the better application for them. And we do have some resources to guide your discussions on that. Just comparing again a little bit, very different. The rebates, much simpler application, more funding is available, chosen through a lottery. Priority school districts, they get like over 90% of the funding for the rebates. So being a priority school district really matters for the rebates, and the grants a little bit less. You get points, but you also, so all those other things that the application can be scored on. And so there's a number of other things. It's much more thorough of an application, but again, the funding that you can get from this is bigger in terms of how much it's going to cover. It goes beyond just the bus and the infrastructure with these grants. But again, you also have 120 days to put this application together. already mentioned this a little bit, but again, really recommending that school districts that might have some sort of expertise or experience with federal grant funding, that might have state funds or utility funds to contribute, and a relationship with their utility. So basically someone that's already somewhat on their way into looking into electrification, they're better suited for this grant program than maybe for the rebate program, because again, they have an edge up when it comes to this. And particularly the Alliance, we're encouraging folks that are on the priority list because you get more funding, but also we're encouraging folks that are in that non-attainment status to apply because you deserve it more. You need this funding more. You have poor air quality, and so you should go get it. Just concluding here, $400 million in grants that will be available. Applications close August 22nd. There will be another rebate opportunity this fall. We're expecting that to be about $600 million. So there will continue to be more opportunities that come up. The prioritization is for low-income, rural, and Indigenous students. You're looking at different here minimums and maximums of who you can apply for. If you're applying for yourself, you have to be replacing at least 15 school buses. If you want to apply with others in a combined application, then you're looking at, not having to deal with that minimum, but you might also have a much higher maximum. So a great opportunity. But we know that there's a lot that we need to do to convince school districts to kind of get into this. They're already strapped for time and under-resourced, understaffed, underpaid. School districts, we know, are really struggling right now. And so what can folks do? Obviously sharing the news, reaching out to your local school district, particularly those that are on the priority list, that are in areas of non-attainment, that are large urban school districts that maybe didn't get to apply for the rebates because they were cut off from that 20% threshold. Providing them resources, providing them opportunity, providing them community or political support. I know that as advocates, that's something that we do really well. We can talk to, elected officials, school boards, community members, and ensure that these folks have the support that they need to put together a strong application, and to also show that the project has support from key stakeholders in the community. We do have a resource directory that can guide school districts that are looking into this. And then reaching out to the local utility. If it's something you already have a relationship with, you can be really instrumental in making sure that they're ready to support your school district if they choose to go down this route. Because again, that utility support, just can't say enough about how important it is. So that concludes a very, very summarized presentation on the Clean School Bus Program. Happy to share more details or answer other questions that folks may have, but I wanted to make sure you all had the opportunity to learn about the grants that are available now, and see if you can bring this funding to your communities. So with that, I'll close out. Let me take a look at the chat, see what questions.
I think you answered the question. We had one question, but you answered it already in your closing. Our applications completed via the school board districts only.
Yes. So, okay. Looks like that question was answered, but yeah, the school district can apply themselves. If they really don't want to undertake this huge application on their own, then they can apply through a third party. Obviously, they need to start talking to them pretty quickly. But a third party is going to have those resources that a school district may not. They can show the experience, they can show expertise with federal funding, they can really help put together the entire application and kind of reduce the burden on the school district. But at the same time, different arrangements come into play with that. Maybe you don't get to own the buses, which means you don't get to reap the benefits of the cost savings. There's pros and cons to both, and each school district should really evaluate what works best for them.
Okay.
And Karen, I think you want to, at least I will say, let Carolina and Jane do any closing remarks if they have any. I think Miss
Great
Jane
idea.
has some.
Great idea.
You want to go first, Jane?
Oh, yeah. Thank you so much, Brother Dillard. First of all, I want to thank you all for this wonderful invitation, and sharing this space with Carolina has been great. We're looking forward to working with you. It was very thorough and wonderful. We'd also like to thank all the branches that came out tonight, as well as our allies who are on this Zoom. We really appreciate it. You have a lot of things you could be doing with your time. Excuse me. We're very grateful that you chose this to do it. We've come a long way since Brown versus Board of Education. And as you recall, Virginia had a companion case that was part of the Brown case, the Davis versus County School Board of Prince Edward County. And even with all the flaws of the implementation of Brown, look at us what we're talking about now, electric school buses. Yeah, what is healthier for our children? One more time. And so it's a really good reason to have this conversation. And I enjoyed sharing this panel with you. I look forward to, excuse me, I look forward to working with you all on this to the best of my ability. President Barnett, thank you so much for the opportunity to share this panel with you. And our techs, Lexi and Taria, thank you for taking up this time. You could be doing 1,000 other things this evening. Karen, as always, you're one of our most reliable ECJ leaders throughout the United States. And we're so grateful that you spend your time doing this, because Lord knows, or the universe is aware as well, that there's so many things and people are grabbing at you from every direction. So I've been honored to be part of this process today. And Carolina, I plan to get back in touch with you for a lot of different reasons. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane, and thank you all for this opportunity. Happy to answer any other questions that you all have. I can put my email in the chat so that you can reach out. And again, for us, this is really about prioritizing our kids, making sure that we can bring a clean right to school to our communities, and really starting in the communities that have seen the burdens of air pollution, of environmental injustice, of environmental racism firsthand. And so this is a great opportunity. There's a lot of work that we'll continue to do with the EPA also. So if folks are interested in that, we are in the EPA's ear all of the time, trying to get improvements to this program and trying to make sure that what they're doing actually brings benefits to these communities. And so happy to be here with you all today and excited to get more advocates in this space. Thank you, Karen, and thank you, Robert and Jane and Joe for really inviting us to be here. And thank you to Lexi and Taria for being such great partners as well.
Thank you, Carolina. And again, I just want to echo what President Barnett said earlier and our moderator, Joe Dillard. We want to thank everybody. And special thank you to Carolina, to Jane, to President Barnett for letting this, allowing this to happen, yay. And of course to Joe Dillard for moving this conversation along and just being an amazing moderator as always. And of course to Director Jones, who has been helping us behind the scene and making sure that this Zoom webinar presentation goes off without any major hiccups. And of course, Taria, Lexi, thank you so much for providing support and helping us answer some questions as we were moving on throughout the webinar. And like I said before, stay tuned. We're going to be having, we're going to have conversations with talking about some of the innovative funding sources that we can tap into, but let's get through this grant program first, and then we'll talk about some other stuff later. So again, thank you so much. And so Director Jones asked me to remind everybody that we have an education symposium coming up. She will be dropping a link into the chat. It is coming up on May 17th. It's going to be in Richmond. It's a full day, and it is going to be on the anniversary of the Brown versus Board of Education case. So it was interesting that you brought it up during your closing remarks, Jane, because we are here in Virginia also battling that and trying to maintain equity and accurate history curriculum in our schools. So please join us. We are going to also do a deep dive like we did today, talking about the issues, talking about the benefits, and providing tools and talking points on how you can advocate your local elected officials and your school board to make sure that our students are prioritized and equity centered in their decision-making processes. And as Carolina said, it's all about the children. So please join us. Again, the link is in the chat. We will be sending out a copy of the recording within the next 24 to 48 hours. Carolina keep your eye out for some emails because I have gotten some requests to do some email introductions. And when we send out our summary, we'll definitely make sure to share the links that Carolina shared in her webinar. And then whatever contact information you'd like us to share, we would also provide that with our branches and our partners that joined us here today. And again, as you know, a highlight to all of our partners, Blue Green Alliance, and everybody who joined us, Clean Energy Works, and just everybody from across the Commonwealth and all of our different members from our branches. So with that, thank you so much for sticking with us. President Barnett, I know you already said your goodbye. Do you want to, is there anything else you thought of? Do you want to close us out? I'll let you have the last word.
Okay, just want to thank everyone once again and have a blessed evening. Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.